The Muslim apologist, what's going on? Thank you for the super chat. How significant was Platonism on the early church?
You
I'd
want
say
to take
it's
that, Neil?
yeah. I would say it's like you said earlier. All these ideas are dependent on each other, whether they like it or not. It's like saying, how do I say this? I don't know. It's like playing. It's like joining a basketball team, and that's not a good way to say it. I don't know. It's like how dependent is. I really can't think of a good analogy right now, but what you said earlier, I just totally dropped that. Whatever, just ignore what I just said. No, but what you said earlier is perfectly right. They're dependent on each other just by default. There's no escaping that.
Yeah, nothing's
Like
in a
you said, the
vacuum.
word theology itself is Platonist. It's from Plato.
Right.
Like you can't have theology without Platonism almost, you know?
Right. I mean, just look at. I'll get to my main point in a second, but just like think about the concept of this chat, right? And we all have vastly different backgrounds and ways of approaching these texts, but we all have a love of this thing, and then but we all approach it from different kind of lenses, and but we're not independent of each other. None of us is in a complete vacuum from each other. We all are reading each other's comments and reacting to them and talking to each other. So there's that way of looking at it. But just looking at it from a more practical standpoint, Muslim apologists think about. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with Hypatia, but Hypatia was a very important um, Alexandrian teacher in the 5th century who was later who passed by being killed by a Christian mob. But before that, she was one of the most important intellectual minds of her generation, and she far surpassed her father in terms of like brilliance and in terms of her work. But with Hypatia, Hypatia really brought Christians and pagans together. She taught both. And if you're an elite, regardless of whether you're Christian or pagan, if you're in that elite circle and um, you have the means to acquire a very, very, very people think student loans are bad now, but like back then, Paideia was not cheap at all.
Yeah.
Few people could complete it, and um, if you were an elite, whether you were a Christian or pagan, you were in that curriculum and you were learning Plato, you were learning Aristotle, you were learning all these things. And Dr. MacDonald, I think what he gets frustrated is people don't seem to realize that whether you're Christian or you're pagan and you're an elite, if you have a paideia, you're learning all of these texts and you're learning it the same way, regardless of what you believe in terms of your theology. So
Yeah.
absolutely it does.
I just
Absolutely
thought
it
of
does.
the better analogy than basketball. It's like a musician putting out music in this time and age. Now, a pop singer, a rap singer, rock singer, whatever it is, the music that's going to be put out today is going to be not only influenced by indirectly or directly, but it's going to be responding to what's already out there. A musician's writing music right now, and they're not, even if they have their influences of the Beatles or whatever, it doesn't matter what that is. They're putting out music for an audience that's today. So whether it's directly or indirectly, whether they know it or not, whether they realize it or not, it's just default that way. That's how I would describe Platonism, Middle Platonism, during the time of Christianity.
Yeah, that's actually a really brilliant analogy. Music is especially a really good analogy to use because artists, if you draw the analogy between musical artists and Christian apologists, they don't, back then in antiquity, they don't like to show their sources. In fact, they tend to try to deny it, even though
Right.
it's very obvious that's where they're writing from. I don't know what generation you are, Neil. I think you're younger than I am, but when I was growing up, there's a thing called grunge, and there's a band called Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah.
And their first album, they sounded exactly like a band called Alice in Chains,
Yeah.
and they they denied ever having listened to Alice in Chains, but you could
Yeah.
tell that they were
I
listening
sometimes I
to
couldn't even
Alice
tell
in
the
Chains
difference.
when they made that record. Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's like the same thing with music. I think
Exactly.
a good analogy, a better analogy than like just straight up ripping something off is Led Zeppelin, right? Led
Yeah.
Zeppelin, Jimmy Page didn't necessarily set out to rip off other artists. He just thought that this was all the same song and we're all playing the same song. So, he didn't even really think about it in the sense of like, um,
But you even
I
get
own this song or whatever. He's just like, I like that. So this is part of the same kind of music. So I'm
but
just going
you
to do it in that style. So
if you notice with music, even transcending genres from like a rock song might borrow from another rock song. They might have the same like tempo and they're like similar style singer. And they both have like you mentioned with Stone Temple Pilots and Alice in Chains, very similar. But also when you get like a hip hop producer sampling some rock song, now we're transcending genres. That's how like Christianity is, taking like something the Eucharist and sort of borrowing the ideas that you might see in some sort of mystery religion. That's like the sampling thing. But they're not pagan. They're not claiming to be pagan. They don't want to be pagan. They don't like pagans, but they're indirectly sort of like sampling some of this stuff and putting it in there and starting a whole new thing.
yeah, absolutely. I think the last thing I'll add really quickly to this is think of if a very simple way of obviously Dr. Litwa's dynamic cultural exchange model is more than this, but think of dynamic cultural exchange at the end of the day as all these people are in the same milieu and they're all remixing the same with the same tools.
Yeah.
Everybody's using a guitar, everybody's using a sampler, everybody's
Right.
using drums or whatever, and they're all using the same tools to make different things. So
Yeah, that they're chained within those parameters. They can't
yeah,
go outside.
yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Like
if you have,
if you make music on a certain synthesizer, if you're using presets and this guy's using the same presets, then your music is going to sound similar because of certain presets on the music and
yeah,
ways of sequencing the music. So you can't really avoid that. It's
th-
technology,
right.
So
Thank you for that super chat, Muslim apologist. Appreciate that.